Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. I ask you to do three things: to like, comment, and subscribe. I also ask you to hit the notification bell so you're notified every time I upload a video. Happy Thursday. I just have a couple questions to ask you. The first question is, how many of us believe that obeying God is not a big deal? The second question is, how many of us look at God's instructions as suggestions? And the third question is, how many of us are preventing a release in our lives because we're choosing not to obey God? I want to tell you right now that certain things will not be released in your life until you choose to obey God. Every day is a constant battle of obeying God and disobeying God. It is said that over 35,000 decisions will be made daily by human beings. How many of those decisions are to obey God, and how many of those decisions are to disobey God? Maybe God told you to give to that person under the bridge. Maybe God told you to call or text an individual. Maybe God told you to leave that relationship. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, I can do it later. I get there. When I get there, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But I'm here to tell you right now that delayed obedience is disobedience. I'll say it one more time. Delayed obedience is disobedience. 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 23 reads, rebellion is as sinful as witchcraft, and stubbornness is as bad as worshiping idols. So because you reject the command of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. I implore you, do not let your rebellion, do not let your stubbornness, do not let your disobedience cause you to miss out on the calling God has placed in your life. The only thing you need to live out your purpose, the only thing you need to live out your calling, the only thing you need to live out your destiny is to obey the voice of the Lord. Do not hold up what God has created for you. In 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 2 to 9, it reads, then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. That's the first ever Uber Eats, was right here in 1 Kings. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. I just want to let you know that obedience in one season can easily turn to disobedience in your next season. Can you imagine if Elijah decided to stay at the brook and pray that God provide more water and pray that God provide more ravens with bread and food? Can you just imagine? What I realized in my Christian walk, that majority of the situations that I put myself in is not because I didn't pray enough, it's not because I didn't fast enough, it's because I did not obey the voice of the Lord. I want you to ask yourself, am I in my current situation? Is it because I didn't pray? Is it because I didn't fast? Or is it because I did not obey the voice of the Lord? Elijah would have died of starvation if he did not obey the voice of the Lord. Please do not die in your situation because you refuse to obey the voice of the Lord. Maybe he's telling you to block that person on social media. Maybe he's telling you to do something else, and do something else. Because you never know what your obedience is tied to. 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 10 to 14 says, so he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called, and bring me, please, a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I was gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Elijah said to her, do not be afraid. Go home. Do as you have said. But first make me a small loaf of bread for me from what you have, and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. In my last video, I talked about how obedience doesn't always make sense. It didn't make sense for the widow to give her last meal to Elijah. It doesn't make sense for you to stay at that job. It doesn't make sense for you to wait until you get married to have sex, especially in the culture we live in. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to pay your tithe when you don't have enough money to pay your bills. It does not make sense. But I'm here to tell you right now that it does not need to make sense in order for you to obey God. There are three things that are released in your life when you decide to obey God. The first thing that is released when you obey God is provision. 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 15 says, she went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. If Elijah did not obey God to leave the place where he was at, where he was comfortable, and asked the widow to help him, he would have never experienced the provision of God. Never think anyone is too beneath you to help you. Elijah could have discounted and discredited this widow, but he would have missed out on the provision that God had planned for him. When you're obedient, you must let go of all your pride, because you don't know who God would choose to bless you through. Remember, it's our job to obey. It's God's job to provide. The second thing that is released is a miracle. 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 16 says, for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. If the widow did not obey Elijah, she would have eaten her last meal, and her son would have died. But obedience releases miracles in your life. Do not let obedience be the reason why you don't experience miracles in your life. God is waiting for you to obey him so he can release a miracle in your life. In Matthew chapter 14 verse 15 to 21, it says, that evening the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place. It is already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy food from themselves. But Jesus said, that is not necessary. You feed them. But we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, they answered. Bring them here, he said. Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, looked up to heaven, and blessed them. Then breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to the disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterward the disciples picked up the 12 baskets of leftovers, and about 5,000 were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children. Most theologians says that around 20,000 people were fed on that day. It's not like they barely got fed. The Bible says that they were so full, and after everyone was satisfied and fed, they said that there was leftovers of 12 basketfuls. But this miracle was only released when the disciples were obedient to Jesus. Are you willing to give what you have in your hand to Jesus? Are you willing to give your talents to Jesus? Are you willing to give your treasures to Jesus? Are you willing to give your time to Jesus? Because the miracle was not released until they gave what they had in their hands to Jesus. Do not inhibit your miracle because you choose not to obey God, remember that it's our job to obey, but it's God's job to work miracles. The third thing that's released is resurrection. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 17 to 23, it says, sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, what do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Give me your son, Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, Lord, my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I'm staying with, by causing her son to die? Then he stretched himself on the board 3 times and cried out to the Lord, Lord, my God, let this boy's life return to him. The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child, carried him down from the room in the house, and he gave him to his mother and said, look, your son is alive. It's never a good thing for a mother to lose their child, but during this time it was more consequential, because during this times women were not able to work. So maybe this mother was hoping that the son would go and bring in resources for the family, but since she decided to obey Elijah and give Elijah some water and some bread in the beginning of the text, she was able to receive resurrection for her son. Please listen to me. Sometimes your obedience will not only be beneficial for you, but it might be beneficial for your children. It might be beneficial for your children's children. You don't know who your obedience will affect, so always be obedient to God. Remember, it is our job to obey, but it's God's job to resurrect. Come on, somebody. Sinclair B. Ferguson once said, be obedient even when you don't know where obedience may lead you. That's so good. I want to leave you with this verse. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 39 to 40 says, so remember this and keep it firmly in mind. The Lord is God, both in heaven and on earth, and there is no other. Let me pause right here and tell you, your spouse is not God. Your job is not God. Your children is not God. Your investment is not God. The stock market is not God. God is God. The same God who's in heaven is the same God that is over this earth. So don't get the game twisted and think that anything can replace God, because God is God. And verse 40 says, if you obey all the decrees and commands I'm giving you today, all will be well with you and your children. I am giving you these instructions so you will enjoy a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you for all time. So the next time you're struggling in the middle of obedience to God, remember that the release is coming for you and your family. If you have any prayer requests, put it in the comment section below. I love you. God bless you, and I see you next time.